I was 34 years old, sitting on the far edge of a mahogany dining table that cost more than my first car, surrounded by the people who shared my DNA, but none of my reality. It was Thanksgiving in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, a place where the lawns are manicured with military precision and the family secrets are buried just shallow enough to rot the grass. The dining room was a masterclass in performative happiness. My mother, Marianne, had outdone herself with the decor. There were tapered candles burning in silver holders, casting a flickering, golden light over the roasted turkey that sat like a sacrificial offering in the center of the table. The air smelled of sage, butter, and the distinct, cloying scent of expensive perfume mixed with unspoken judgment. Framed photographs lined the mantel behind my father's head, a gallery of triumphs. There was Brielle winning a beauty pageant, Brielle graduating from fashion school, Brielle cutting the ribbon on her first studio. There were no pictures of me. I had long ago accepted that in the Museum of the Stone family legacy, I was not even a footnote. I was a typo they were trying to ignore. I sat at the fringe, the seat usually reserved for the unexpected guest or the distant cousin, even though I was the eldest daughter. To my left was my Aunt Linda, who kept asking me if I was still single with the concern one usually reserves for a terminal diagnosis. To my right was an empty space where the air felt colder. At the head of the table sat my father, Richard Stone. He was a man who wore his authority like a suit of armor, stiff and impenetrable. He was carving the turkey with a surgical intensity, the silver knife slicing through the meat with a wet, decisive sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the room. The conversation had been navigating the safe harbors of weather and local sports, but I could feel the current shifting. Richard did not like safe harbors. He liked rough waters where he could prove he was the only captain capable of steering the ship. He set the carving knife down, wiped his hands on a linen napkin, and looked down the length of the table. His eyes bypassed the steaming sides of green bean casserole and candied yams, bypassed my mother, bypassed Brielle, and landed squarely on me. It was the look of a predator spotting a limp. "So, Skyla," he said, his voice booming enough to reach the living room where the football game was droning on. "We have not heard much from you lately. What are you doing with yourself these days? Still playing around with those computers?" The table went quiet. Forks paused halfway to mouths. My mother, Marianne, immediately began smoothing the napkin in her lap, her fingers working the fabric with nervous energy. She did not look at me. She stared at the centerpiece, likely praying that I would not say anything to embarrass the family. In the Stone household, sin was forgivable, but embarrassment was a capital offense. I took a slow sip of water, feeling the ice hit my teeth. "I run a systems integration firm," I said quietly. "It keeps me busy." It was the truth, but it was a truth so diluted it was almost a lie. I did not mention that my firm, LumenGrid Automation, had just revolutionized supply chain logistics for 3 Fortune 500 companies. I did not mention that my secondary venture, Pilot House Systems, had been acquired in a silent deal that reshaped my entire financial existence. To them, I was just Skyla, the one who tinkered, the one who did not fit the mold of Southern belle perfection. Richard chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Systems integration. That sounds like a fancy word for tech support." He looked around the table, inviting the others to join in his amusement. "I hope it pays the rent. You know, in this economy, you cannot just drift forever." I gripped my fork tighter, the metal biting into my palm. "I am doing fine. Dad," I said. Brielle, who was sitting to his right, swirled the Pinot Noir in her crystal glass. She looked radiant. I had to give her that. Her hair was a cascade of perfect blonde waves, her skin glowing with the kind of health that costs a fortune to maintain. She was the golden child, the one who had followed the script. She leaned forward, her bracelets jingling softly. "Oh, speaking of business, Daddy, did I tell you about the expansion?" she asked. Her voice sugary and bright. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was redirecting the spotlight to herself, but in doing so, she was casting a longer shadow over me. Richard's face softened instantly. "Tell us, sweetheart," The studio. Yes, Brielle beamed. Brielle and Company Bridal is officially looking at a second location downtown. We are overwhelmed with orders. I mean, the demand for my custom lace designs is just insane. I might even need to hire a new manager just to handle the overflow. That is my girl, Richard said, raising his glass. See? That is what ambition looks like. Building something real, something you can touch, not just staring at screens all day. Marianne finally looked up, smiling at Brielle with a mixture of relief and pride. We are so proud of you. Brielle, you have such a gift. The praise washed over the table, warm and excluding. I sat there, cutting a piece of turkey into smaller and smaller squares, analyzing the geometry of the meat, so I would not have to look at their faces. I knew the truth about Brielle's studio, because I knew how to read market signals, and I knew the bridal industry in Charlotte was oversaturated. I had seen the reviews, online complaints about delayed shipments and rising costs, but here, at this table, facts did not matter. Only the narrative mattered, and the narrative was that Brielle was the star, and I was the black hole. Then, Richard turned back to me. The contrast was deliberate. He wanted everyone, Aunt Linda, Uncle Bob, the cousins, to see the difference. You could learn a thing or two from your sister. Skyla, he said. He picked up his wine glass but did not drink. He just held it, swirling the red liquid. You are 34 years old. By your age, I had a mortgage, 2 kids, and a partnership in the firm. You are renting a condo. You have no husband, and you are vague about your job. It worries your mother. Marianne did not confirm or deny this. She just took a small bite of stuffing, her eyes fixed on her plate. I am happy, Dad, I said, keeping my voice level. My life is different, but it works for me. Different, Richard scoffed. Different is what people say when they are failing but do not want to admit it. Look, I am going to be honest with you because I am your father. We are tired of wondering if you are going to call us asking for money. I felt a cold flush of heat rise up my neck. I have never asked you for money. I said, not once. Not since I was 18. Not yet, Richard corrected. But it is coming. I can smell it. You do not have a foundation. Skyla, you are floating, and people who float eventually sink. The room was deadly silent now. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting down the seconds of my humiliation. I tried to disengage. I think we should just enjoy the dinner, I said. No, I think we should be clear, Richard said, his voice rising. He leaned forward, his face hardening into a mask of disdain. I have carried this family on my back for 40 years. I built a reputation. Brielle is adding to that reputation. You are a question mark, and I do not like question marks. He paused, letting the tension stretch until it was nearly unbearable. Then he delivered the line he had clearly been rehearsing in his head all afternoon. If you cannot take care of yourself, Skyla, then do not come crying to us. If you fail, you go live in the streets, because I am done supporting dead weight. The words hung in the air, violent and absolute. Go live in the streets. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who had once checked under my bed for monsters, now looking at me as if I were the monster. I looked at Marianne, waiting for her to intervene, to say, Richard, that is enough. But she just reached for her wine glass, her hand trembling slightly. She was choosing her peace over my dignity. I looked at Brielle, and I saw a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her perfectly lined lips. She was enjoying this. She was winning. And for Brielle, winning was the only thing that made a meal taste good. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the tears, the shouting, the defensive scene that would prove I was exactly the emotional mess they claimed I was. They wanted a reaction so they could say, see, she is unstable. I took a deep breath. I inhaled the scent of sage and hypocrisy, and then I exhaled. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply placed my fork and knife parallel on my plate, the universal signal that I was finished. I picked up my linen napkin, folded it neatly into a square, and placed it to the left of my setting. Thank you for the meal. Marianne, I said. The turkey was excellent. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound that made Aunt Linda flinch. I stood up. Smoothing the front of my dress, I looked Richard dead in the eye. He looked surprised, perhaps disappointed that I had not given him the fight he wanted. "I will see myself out," I said. I turned and walked away. I walked past the grandfather clock, past the gallery of Brielle's achievements, past the front door with its festive wreath. I grabbed my coat from the rack and stepped out into the biting November air. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing them inside their warm, delusional bubble. My car was parked at the end of the driveway, a black sedan that looked modest enough to blend in but had an engine built for performance much like me. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cold against my back. I sat there for a moment in the silence, listening to the ringing in my ears. Go live in the streets. The phrase played on a loop in my mind. It was laughable. It was absurd. But it still hurt. Like a paper cut doused in lemon juice. It wasn't the financial threat that stung. I had enough liquidity to buy this entire neighborhood if I wanted to. It was the total, absolute lack of faith. It was the realization that to them, I was worthless unless I was reflected in their mirror. I pulled my phone out of my purse. The screen lit up the dark interior of the car. There were 3 notifications from my chief financial officer and a weekly summary report from the automated dashboard of LumenGrid. I unlocked the phone and opened the banking app that I kept hidden in a folder labeled Utilities. The numbers stared back at me, crisp and comforting. Net income. Year to date, $25,480,000. I scrolled down. My liquid assets alone were sitting at 8 figures. The acquisition of Pilot House Systems had closed 2 weeks ago, depositing a lump sum that most people would need 10 lifetimes to earn. I was not just solvent. I was wealthy in a way my father could not even comprehend with his local law practice and his country club memberships. I tapped on the Team Chat app. A message from my lead developer popped up. Skyla. The beta test for the new logistics algorithm is at 99% efficiency. We are ready to launch on Monday. I typed back a quick reply. Excellent work. Proceed. I put the phone down on the passenger seat. Through the windshield, I could see the glow of the dining room window. I could see the silhouettes of my family. Still eating. Still talking. They were probably dissecting my exit right now. Richard was probably saying, "See?" She ran away. She cannot handle the truth. Brielle was probably pouring another glass of wine, relieved that the competition had removed itself from the arena. They had no idea. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. For years, I had been bringing my achievements to their doorstep like a cat bringing home a dead mouse, hoping for a pat on the head. I had wanted them to see me. I had wanted them to be proud. But tonight, as the engine purred to life, I realized that I was done. The transaction was closed. I do not need them to understand anymore. I whispered to the empty car. I shifted the gear into reverse, ready to back out of their driveway and out of their lives. I was going to go back to my high-rise condo in the city, pour myself a glass of scotch that cost more than their Thanksgiving turkey, and continue building my empire. I was free, or so I thought. What I did not know, as I drove away from that house with its perfect lawn and its poisoned dinner table, was that the severance package was not going to be that clean. I did not know that while I was checking my $25 million balance, a file was sitting in a drawer in my father's study with my name on it. I did not know that 3 weeks ago. A pen had moved across a piece of paper, tracing the loops and curves of a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. They had told me to go live in the streets. It was a cruel insult, a throwaway line meant to assert dominance, but they had already taken steps to make it a reality. They had leveraged my name against a debt that was rotting from the inside out. They thought I was a helpless little girl who would come crawling back when the world got too hard. They had no idea that they had just declared war on a woman who had the ammunition to burn their entire kingdom to the ground. I turned onto the main road, the headlights cutting through the darkness. I turned up the radio to drown out the memory of my father's voice, unaware that the real noise was just beginning. The countdown had started. Not for me, but for them. And unlike their insults, the coming storm was going to be documented, notarized, and utterly irreversible. The drive from my parents' house to my condo in downtown Charlotte usually took 40 minutes, but tonight, it felt like I was traversing a century of history. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of concrete illuminated by the sterile glow of streetlights. But my mind was not on the road. It was traveling back to the source of the rot, back to the rooms and hallways where the script for tonight's disaster had been written decades ago. To understand why my father felt comfortable telling me to live in the streets, you have to understand the architecture of the Stone family. It was not built on love, it was built on image. From the time I was old enough to hold a screwdriver, I knew I was a structural defect in their carefully designed blueprint. I was 10 years old when the divide became a canyon. While other girls in my 4th grade class were asking for dolls or pony rides, I was obsessed with the way things worked. I remember dragging an old, discarded toaster out of the neighbor's trash can and bringing it into our garage. I spent 3 hours dismantling it, categorizing the screws, cleaning the heating elements, and marveling at the simple logic of the circuitry. I was covered in grease and soot, my fingernails black with grime, but I felt a profound sense of peace. The machine made sense. If a wire was connected, it worked. If it was broken, you fixed it. My father found me there. I expected him to be impressed. I wanted to show him that I had fixed the spring mechanism. Instead, he looked at me with a mixture of confusion and distaste that I would come to know better than my own reflection. "Skyla," he had said, his voice tight. "Go inside and wash yourself. You look like a mechanic. That is not how a stone presents herself to the world." He did not ask if I had fixed it. He did not care about the function. He only cared about the aesthetic. That was the beginning. While I was burying myself in textbooks on coding languages and physics, my younger sister, Brielle, was mastering the art of being delightful. Brielle was the child they had ordered from the catalog. She was blonde, bubbly, and instinctively understood that her job was to reflect our parents' vanity back at them. When she twirled in a new dress, my mother, Marianne, would clap her hands together and beam. When she struggled with basic math, my father would laugh and say it was charming because she would never need to worry about numbers